She was 35 years old, a mother, a singer, and she was lying on an operating table with no heartbeat, no brainwaves, and no blood in her brain. By every medical definition, Pam Reynolds was dead. She was dead for over an hour, and when she woke up, she remembered everything. She remembered floating above her own body. She remembered the exact surgical instrument the doctor used to cut open her skull, a tool she had never seen before. She remembered a conversation between two surgeons. She remembered the song playing in the operating room. Every single detail was verified. So what happened? That is the question that is keeping some of the world's best neuroscientists up at night. Because Pam Reynolds is not alone. There are millions of people, surgeons, teachers, children, atheists, who have gone to the edge of death and come back saying the same thing. There is something on the other side. Today we are going to look at the evidence, the real cases, the real science, and the question that may be the most important one humanity has ever asked. What happens when we die? Let's start with the basics. A near-death experience, or NDE, is a profound event that occurs when a person is on the brink of death or has been declared clinically dead and later revived. The term was first coined in 1975 by psychiatrist Dr. Raymond Moody in his book Life, Afterlife, in which he documented the accounts of over 150 patients who had been resuscitated after cardiac arrest. What struck Moody, and what has struck every serious researcher since, is how consistent the reports are across different countries, different religions, different ages, different cultures. People who have never met, never spoken, never read about each other's experiences are describing the same thing. They describe leaving their physical body and floating upward. They describe looking down at their own body, watching doctors and nurses work on them from above, recalling details they could not have seen from where they were lying. They describe moving through a dark tunnel toward an overwhelming light, a light that does not hurt the eyes, but that feels, they say, more warm and alive than anything they have ever experienced. They describe encountering deceased relatives, parents, grandparents, siblings, who greet them and guide them. They describe a life review, watching every moment of their existence replay, not just visually, but emotionally, feeling not just what they did, but what others felt because of what they did. And almost universally, they describe being told, "It is not your time. You have to go back." According to a Gallup survey, over 8 million Americans alone report having had a near-death experience. Global estimates reach into the tens of millions. These are not unusual people. These are doctors and nurses, veterans and children, believers and non-believers. And for decades, science told them they were wrong, that it was oxygen deprivation, a trick of the brain, a hallucination. But science is starting to change its mind. Now let's go back to Pam Reynolds, because her case is the one that changed the conversation. It is August 8, 1991. Pam Reynolds, a singer-songwriter from Atlanta, Georgia, is wheeled into the operating room at the Barrow Neurological Institute in Phoenix, Arizona. She is 35 years old, and she has a massive aneurysm, a dangerous bulge in a major artery deep inside her brain. Without surgery, it will rupture, and if it ruptures, she will die. The only surgeon willing to attempt the repair is Dr. Robert Spetzler, one of the most respected neurosurgeons in the world. But the procedure he intends to perform is extreme. It is called hypothermic cardiac standstill, and it requires something almost unthinkable. To safely operate on the aneurysm, Pam's brain needs to be completely empty of blood, which means her heart needs to stop, which means her body needs to be cooled to a temperature so low that her cells slow to near stillness. In other words, to save her life, they need to temporarily end it. Here is what happens. Pam's body temperature is lowered to 15 degrees Celsius, barely above freezing. Her heart is stopped, a flat line. Her breathing ceases. Her brain activity goes completely flat, confirmed by EEG monitors tracking every electrical signal in her brain. There are none. All blood is drained from her brain. Her eyes are taped shut. Foam speakers are pressed into both ears, playing loud clicking sounds. Not music, not voices. Loud, repetitive clicks, specifically designed to confirm that her brainstem is not responding to any stimulus. She cannot see, she cannot hear, she cannot feel. She has no heartbeat, no brain waves, no blood in her brain. She is, by every measurable medical standard, clinically dead. And then Pam Reynolds leaves her body. She described it later as a pulling sensation. Not frightening, but purposeful, like she was going somewhere she wanted to go. She said she felt herself rise upward and turn around, and there below her was her own body on the operating table, surrounded by doctors and nurses, and lit from above by surgical lights. She watched. She noticed a surgeon using a tool near her skull. She described it specifically. It looked like an electric toothbrush, she said, with interchangeable blades stored in a case that resembled a socket wrench set. She said the sound it made was a high-pitched whirring. When investigators later checked, that description was exactly accurate. The tool was a Midas Rex bone saw. It does look like an electric toothbrush. The blades are stored in a case resembling a socket wrench set. Pam had never seen this instrument before. No one had described it to her, and her eyes were taped shut. She also overheard a conversation between two surgeons who noted that her arteries were smaller than expected on one side. This was later confirmed. And then something shifted. Pam described feeling herself pulled away from the operating room, drawn toward a light that she could not look away from. Not because it was blinding, but because it was beautiful. She said it felt like coming home. At some point, she became aware of her grandmother, then an uncle, then other relatives who had died before her. The longer she stayed, the more she wanted to remain. She did not want to go back. Her uncle, she said, guided her back toward her body. She resisted. He pushed her in. She described it as jumping into ice water, and then her heart, shocked back to normal rhythm by the surgical team, began to beat again. When Pam came out of surgery, she told the doctors and nurses what she had seen. Several of them were visibly unsettled. They confirmed what she described. Her case has been studied by researchers around the world. It has been called, and I am quoting directly from the Society for Psychical Research, the single best instance we now have in the literature on NDEs to confound the skeptics, and the case coming closest to providing solid, scientific evidence suggestive of the post-mortem survival of consciousness. Pam Reynolds died in 2010, not from the aneurysm, but from heart failure. She spent the last 19 years of her life speaking openly about what she experienced. She never wavered, not once. She said it was the most real thing she had ever known. Now, let's talk about the science, because this is not just one woman's story. In 2024, researchers at the University of Michigan published findings that sent shockwaves through the neuroscience community. Led by Dr. Jimo Borjigan, the team analyzed brain recordings from 4 dying patients, people who had been on life support and whose families had agreed to withdraw it. As the patients died, the researchers continued to monitor their brain activity via EEG. In 2 of those patients, something completely unexpected happened. In the moments immediately after life support was withdrawn, after the heart stopped, there was a sudden, massive surge of brain activity. Not a flicker, a surge, concentrated in a specific region called the temporoparietal junction, an area of the brain associated with consciousness, visual processing, motion, and, critically, out-of-body sensations. This kind of end-of-life brain surge had previously only been observed in dying rats. This was the first time it had been documented in humans. The researchers could not tell us what those patients experienced. Neither of them survived to describe it. But Dr. Borjigan said, and I quote, "I could almost guess what they might have experienced." Meanwhile, Dr. Sam Parnia, a resuscitation physician at NYU Langone Health and one of the world's leading researchers in this field, has been conducting the most rigorous scientific study of near-death experiences ever attempted. It is called the AWARE study, awareness during resuscitation, and it has involved 25 hospitals across the United States and the United Kingdom. Over years of research, Parnia and his team interviewed hundreds of cardiac arrest survivors. What they found was striking. Many survivors reported experiencing something Parnia calls lucid dying. Clear, structured, deeply meaningful cognitive processes occurring while their heart had stopped and their brain should have been shutting down. They described watching their own resuscitation from above. They described reviewing their lives with profound emotional clarity. They described encountering light. And crucially, many of them described specific, accurate details of what was happening in the room around their body while they were clinically dead. Parnia has stated that these findings challenge one of medicine's most fundamental assumptions, that consciousness ceases the moment the heart stops. The evidence, he says, suggests otherwise. And it is not just brain activity that challenges the skeptics. A landmark study from the University of Padova tested the actual memories formed during near-death experiences. Using EEG monitoring and psychological analysis, researchers compared NDE memories to memories of real events and to memories of imagined events. The results were unambiguous. NDE memories were neurologically indistinguishable from memories of real experiences. They were rich in sensory detail, emotional content, and self-referential clarity. They were nothing like dreams, nothing like hallucinations. The brain was filing them exactly as it files things that actually happened. The skeptical explanations, oxygen deprivation, serotonin surges, the brain's final electrical gasp, have not gone away. They deserve serious consideration, but none of them explain how Pam Reynolds described a surgical instrument she had never seen. None of them explain how a cardiac arrest patient in the Netherlands described watching a nurse remove his dentures and place them in a specific drawer, a description later confirmed in exact detail by the nurse herself. None of them explain the verified observations, the details that check out. That is the piece that keeps researchers awake. Pam Reynolds and that Dutch patient are two examples, but there are thousands more. Take Ibn Alexander. He is not a believer in the supernatural. He is a neurosurgeon, trained at Duke, on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. In 2008, he contracted a severe case of bacterial meningitis that destroyed his neocortex, the outer layer of the brain responsible for all higher cognition, consciousness, memory, language, personality. For 7 days, Ibn Alexander lay in a coma. His doctors believed he had suffered irreversible brain damage. They prepared his family for the worst. When he woke up, his brain had recovered, and he had memories. He described traveling through a vivid, overwhelming realm, not a dream, he insists, because he had no functioning brain with which to dream. He described being accompanied by a guide, a young woman on a butterfly's wing, surrounded by light and music. He had never met this woman. Shortly after his recovery, his biological family, from whom he had been separated by adoption, sent him a photograph of a sister who had died before he could meet her. It was the woman from his vision. He has spent years trying to explain this using the tools of neuroscience, and he cannot. He wrote about it in a book called Proof of Heaven, and he is clear that he does not use that title lightly. He is a scientist. He knows what extraordinary claims require. He makes the claim anyway. Or consider the work of Dutch cardiologist Dr. Pim van Lommel, who in 2001 published one of the most comprehensive NDE studies in history in The Lancet, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world. Van Lommel and his team studied 344 cardiac arrest survivors across multiple hospitals in the Netherlands over 8 years. They interviewed each patient within days of resuscitation, before memory could be distorted by time or suggestion. 18% reported a near-death experience. Of those, many described floating above their bodies and observing accurate details of their resuscitation, details they could not have perceived while unconscious and being worked on by medical staff. One patient's account became particularly well known. He described, from a position above the room, watching a nurse remove his dentures during resuscitation and place them in a specific drawer of a specific crash cart. A year later, during a follow-up hospital visit, he recognized the nurse. He described exactly what she had done. She confirmed it. She said she had never told anyone about it. She did not know how he could possibly know. Van Lommel's conclusion was careful and scientific. These experiences, he wrote, cannot be explained by brain physiology alone. They suggest the possibility of consciousness existing independently of the brain, even perhaps surviving it. There are thousands of cases like these, from every country on Earth, from children too young to have formed cultural ideas about what death is supposed to look like, from people who were atheists before their experience, and who remained skeptical about religion after it, but who came back absolutely certain that something exists beyond this life. They do not all agree on what it is. Some describe it in religious terms, others do not. But they agree on how it felt, more real than anything they had ever experienced, and it changed them forever. not in small ways, in fundamental ones. Studies show NDE survivors exhibit long-term reductions in the fear of death, increased empathy, decreased materialism, and a lasting sense that love is the most important force in existence. These are not people who had a nice dream. These are people who came back different. We do not know with scientific certainty what lies beyond death. That is the honest statement. Anyone who tells you otherwise, in either direction, is overstating what we know. But here is what we do know. Millions of people have stood at the threshold, and many of them have come back with memories, verified, neurologically real memories, of somewhere that should not exist. The brain, in its final moments, surges with activity in exactly the regions associated with consciousness and out-of-body experience. Consciousness appears to persist, in some form, beyond the point where medicine says it should. Survivors report details that they could not have known, and those details check out. Dr. Peter Fenwick was one of Britain's most respected neuropsychiatrists. He spent over 30 years studying near-death experiences, not as a believer, but as a scientist. He began as a skeptic. He ended as something else. Before his death in November 2024, he said this: "The evidence that the mind exists beyond the brain is now too strong to dismiss. Something survives. The instruments of science are finally being pointed, with rigor and without flinching, at the one thing we have always been afraid to examine directly. What happens when we die? And what they are finding is not silence. Maybe death is not an ending. Maybe it is a door,